Chapter 17. I Have Not Slept a Wink. We helped ourselves to the friar's bread and cheese. Actually, we fell upon the food like refugees, which in a strange way was exactly what we were. Reality refugees. That might make a good title for Troy's movie. After eating the last bite, Troy collapsed onto the cot and immediately fell into a deep sleep. I scanned the upstairs for another mattress, but found none. There was a small closet that contained a clothes stool, which I used, and a room filled with hanging bundles of herbs and all sorts of cutting and measuring implements. A bucket of water sat on the floor, and I poured some into a bowl and washed my face as best I could, using the inside of my skirt as a towel. The water felt refreshing, but I longed for a bath. I couldn't find a tub or a shower. What did people do in this century? Back in the friar's room, Troy slept with an arm stretched across his forehead. There wasn't much room on that cot. If two people shared it, their bodies would be pressed together. I grimaced. "Troy," I whispered, trying to wake him up. If he knew that there were no other beds, he might be a gentleman and offer to sleep on the floor. "Troy!" But he didn't budge. I yawned. How long could the human body go without sleep? Maybe I could sleep in the friar's chair with my head resting on the desk. I pushed aside some rolls of parchment paper, an inkwell, and a jar of quills. But I couldn't get comfortable, and I tipped the ink, staining one of my sleeves. Lady Capulet would probably put me on the rack for ruining her dress. I rested my head in my hands and watched Troy's chest as it rose and fell. He had kicked the blankets off the cot. I thought about Juliet's blankets and how she liked to crawl beneath them to think. Juliet, sweet Juliet, getting ready to marry a man twice her age. Despite my exhaustion, I unrolled one of the parchments and dipped a quill into the inkwell. The friar said that we could help ourselves to whatever we found. The possibility existed that I might never see Juliet again, and I wanted to tell her a few things, like a wiser, older sister. It didn't take long to figure out the quill, and soon I was writing a letter to Juliet. I told her about my life back in Manhattan, about how I also felt trapped, so she would know that she wasn't alone, about how our mothers were kind of alike, and how I always wished for a different life. I told her about the charm and the ashes, and I wasn't really her cousin, but I was her friend, and that even if things went terribly wrong, she should never ever consider suicide. My head fell forward, and I couldn't keep my eyes open. Troy had rolled onto his side, freeing a narrow slice of cot. I lay next to him, not caring that his butt pressed into my thighs, not caring about anything at all but getting some rest. I slept long and hard and dreamed about kissing Benvolio. The kiss was soft. But then his face morphed into Troy's face, and the kiss grew urgent. Troy held me so close that I could hear his heart beating. I pressed closer, wanting to kiss him forever, wanting to. "Mimi, wake up! You're on my hurt leg!" At first, I didn't know where I was. The room was dark except for a single lit candle that sat on the desk. The friar's desk. I was still in Verona, sharing a cot with Troy. What time was it? What day was it? I wiped drool from my chin, hoping Troy hadn't noticed. Much more to my embarrassment, at some time during the nap I had curled into the crook of his arm and flung my leg across his body, smothering us both with my velvet party dress. I sat up. I had just taken a nap with Troy Summer. Clarissa would be so jealous. Troy stretched his arms. "Well, we're still in Shakespeare land," he yawned. "I was hoping that you were wrong and that this was actually a dream. Speaking of dreaming, did you know that you talk in your sleep?" He winked at me. What had I said in my sleep? Had I called out his name? He scooted to the edge of the cot. "I have to pee." His limp was more pronounced, as were his curses each time he took a step. "I'm supposed to pee in this bowl?" he hollered when he found the clothes stool. "Yes," I hollered back. When he returned, he fell into the cot. "I feel dizzy," he mumbled. It was difficult to tell by candlelight, but his face looked flushed. I lit another candle and placed it on the window-sill above the cot. He closed his eyes. Beads of sweat sat on the bridge of his nose and above his upper lip. His blonde hair, usually blown-dried and gelled, lay flat against his forehead. Even so, he was still gorgeous. His white shirt was unbuttoned, exposing a tan chest speckled with reddish-blonde hair. "See something you like?" When had he opened his eyes? How long had I been looking at his chest? My voice rose defensively. "What is that supposed to mean? I suppose you think that just because I'm a girl—" I folded my arms. "You should stop assuming that everyone is in love with you." "Whoa," he said, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "Touched a nerve, did I? Who are you in love with, Mimi? That freak Benvolio? You like the way he kisses your fingers?" As if my feelings were any of his business. "I don't know any freaks, Troy, except for the hundreds that you date." He forced a shallow laugh. "Hundreds is a bit of an exaggeration. Besides, I'm expected to date lots of girls. My fans expect me to act a certain way. It's all about appearances. You should know that. The private person and the public persona are two different things entirely." "Oh, please. You expect me to believe that you're forced to date a different girl every week? That you do it just to sell the music?" His voice grew defensive as well. I don't expect you to believe anything I say, Mimi. You've hated me from the moment we met. I saw that look on your face the first time we kissed. Total disgust. Disgust? He thought his kiss had disgusted me? You've always acted like you're so much better than me, he continued, clearly insulted. New York society meets California beach bum. You ignore me at the theater because you assume that Troy the pop star is all there is to me. If you think that's who I really am, then you're a hypocrite. He sat up against the wall and pushed the pillow under his wounded thigh. I glared at him. Hypocrite? What are you talking about? You might think that you're better than me, but we're no different. We're both marketable products and people use us to advance their own careers. But is the product who we really are? I tried not to turn away from his intense gaze, even though it felt like he could see right through my clothes. I watched you come to rehearsal every day. I saw the way you nervously fidgeted until the rehearsal started, the way you always stood off to the side, by yourself, until your mother came into the hall. Then you turned into Mimi Wallingford, theater princess. He mimicked my mother's voice surprisingly well. Turn your left side to the audience, Mimi. It's your best side. Wear the padded bra, Mimi. It'll make you look sexier. Stand center stage, Mimi. You are a Wallingford, after all. He raised his eyebrows. You don't want all that, do you? That's why you're faking the whole stage fright thing. I wanted to slap him. I wanted to throw both wooden shoes right at his thick head. How dare he say such mean things to me? Faking the stage fright thing. I have stage fright. It's very real and it's horrible. Dr. Harmony says it's like post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic? Troy wiped his upper lip. His neck glistened with sweat. Think about it, Mimi. The stage fright serves a purpose, doesn't it? There was that smirk of his, spread right across his know-it-all face. I felt completely naked. What possible purpose could my stage fright serve besides making me totally miserable? I sat down at the desk, turning my back to him. Who was he to psychoanalyze me? Troy Summer was a bubblegum museum who knew nothing about the pressures of my life. Good evening, children. Friar Lawrence entered the room carrying a tray of food. You slept the entire day. He set the tray on the bedside table. I rely on the kindness of my flock for all my meals. Tonight we are very fortunate because Emmeline, the cobbler's wife, brought vegetable soup. He handed me a bowl and a half loaf of bread. I inhaled the soup, not caring that it was badly in need of salt, or that I didn't recognize some of the vegetables. I shoved a chunk of bread into my mouth. The friar offered Troy a bowl. Eat this, my son, for it will help speed your recovery. Troy waved the bowl away. I'm not hungry, he moaned. What's this? Friar Lawrence set the soup aside and pressed his hand to Troy's forehead. He is still feverish. Mimi, come and hold the candle while I check the wound. Troy didn't object this time, watching worriedly. Clutching the candle, I almost gagged as the friar opened the tear in Troy's tights. The skin around the stitches blazed red. Pus oozed at the sides. I thought I might faint just looking at it. Some doctor I'd make. Oh my God, Troy explained. It's totally infected. I'm gonna get gangrene. I wouldn't wish gangrene on anyone, not even Troy. Do you have any medicine? I asked. The tainted blood should be cleansed. I'll fetch the leeches. No, Troy cried, not the leeches. My son, it is possible that the wound will heal and that your fever will pass, but without treatment there is also the possibility that your leg will blacken. The only remedy for a blackened leg is to cut it off. Troy clenched his fists and his face turned beet red. A vein bulged in his neck. I thought he might stroke out at that very moment. This is all your fault, he snarled. You've infected me with your barbaric surgery. You're looking at a huge malpractice suit, buddy. Threatening was not going to help. Something had to be done, but what? If we were in New York, we'd have antibiotic cream and sterile bandages, but then I thought about the cowboy movie where the old drunken doctor pours whiskey on his patient's gunshot wound. Friar, what's in that jug? I pointed to the blue jug on his desk. He looked sheepish. Just a bit of medicinal tea for my aching knees. I picked up the jug and smelled its contents. The alcoholic fumes shot straight into my sinuses. Some tea. Perfect, I said. Troy, I think we can sterilize your wound. It's the only thing I can think of to help. Sterilize? The friar asked, rubbing his bald spot. Is that something you do back in Manhattan? Yes. My stomach turned queasy as I glanced at the glistening pus. You can't even look at an accident scene, my mother had said. You're too sensitive. I clenched my jaw. I'm going to need boiling water. It must reach a full rolling boil. Can you do that? The friar nodded. I have a small oven and cooking pot out back. It will take some time, though, to get the fire started. So we set to work. The wound was such a mess that I figured we should start all over and do it right. When the water was ready, I convinced the friar that we needed to wash our hands. I sterilized a knife and a tweezer-like tool. The friar was curious about the entire process and asked all sorts of questions. I told him about bacteria, and he listened intently, fetching more water when I needed it. I cut the stitches. Then, using the sterilized tweezers, I pulled all 12 stitches free. Since there were no clean bandages, I cut the bottom half of my underskirt into strips. It was unbleached linen, and since it had been stuffed under the velvet dress, it seemed fairly clean. I used those strips soaked in hot water to soften the scabs and clean away the pus, reopening the wound. Troy kept wincing, but kept very still. This wasn't rocket science, obviously. Everyone knows how to clean a wound, though I had never cleaned one as deep as that. I became very focused. The friar watched my every move. It didn't seem as disgusting as I got caught up in the process. "This is going to hurt," I told Troy when I picked up the jug. He nodded and clenched his entire body as I poured alcohol onto the wound. Having never stitched anything, I turned this part over to Friar Lawrence, but only after sterilizing his needle and thread. Troy gulped down what was left in the jug, which I later learned was called grappa, an intense alcoholic drink made from grapes. He pressed his head into the pillow and groaned each time the needle pierced his tender skin. I took his hand and held it. He almost squeezed my fingers off. Finally, it was over. I dried the wound and tied the rest of the linen strips over it. "Hopefully that will buy us some time," I told him. "Thank you," he said, smiling weakly. "Have you ever considered becoming a doctor?" I returned the smile. Maybe Dissection 101 wouldn't be so bad after all. "It's the least I could do," I said. "I'd probably be dead if you hadn't saved me from Tybalt." Candlelight reflected in his green eyes. Reddish stubble sandpapered his square jaw. I sighed. "You wouldn't even be in this mess if I had just handed my mother the necklace." Troy drifted back to sleep. Friar Lawrence and I shared the rest of the bread. It was chewy, with seeds sprinkled throughout. My letter lay on the desk. "Friar, I wrote a letter for Juliet Capulet. If anything happens to me, or if I suddenly disappear, will you make certain that she gets it?" "Of course, my child. But why would you disappear?" "That charm I mentioned, I think it brought me here. I think it's magic. Do you believe in magic?" "What you call magic, I call divine intervention. So yes, I believe." He wiped crumbs from the front of his robe. "I am a man of faith, Mimi. I struggle with the impossible every day. When I first saw you standing in the square, I knew you had come from someplace else. And all your talk about medicine convinced me further." He chuckled. "And I listen to confession every Sunday. You'd be amazed by some of the impossible things I hear." I decided to make my own confession. "Friar, Juliet is supposed to fall in love with Romeo. They're part of a story that a man named William Shakespeare wrote, but their love is doomed from the start because of the feud." "Ah, the feud," he frowned and shook his head. "It is a plague on this city." "Why are they feuding?" I asked. Shakespeare never explains that in his play. Friar Lawrence stroked his cross. "It's no secret, so I shall tell you the tale." He sat back in his chair and rested his hands on his belly. "Lady Capulet was born Veronique Valdeza, a member of a wealthy merchant-class family, but they were not nobles, and her father desired a title of nobility more than anything else. Just before Veronique turned 13, she attended her first formal ball, where she met a bachelor by the name of Alfonso Montague, heir to a titled Verona family. He was none other than Romeo's future father, and as you may have guessed, she fell passionately in love with him." "Lady Capulet in love with a Montague?" This was just like my second cousin Greg's soap opera. Friar Lawrence continued. "Though Alfonso Montague was beyond her class, Veronique wanted to be his wife, and her father wanted his daughter titled. So Valdeza tried to entice a proposal of marriage by offering half his Venetian fleet to the Montagues. But only if Alfonso married his daughter. The Montagues would not agree to marry their only son to a merchant's daughter. They made this proclamation while standing on the church steps for all the eavesdroppers and gossips to hear. The Valdeza family was shamed, and Veronique was heartbroken. People whispered when she passed by and pointed fingers at her in church. They said she did not deserve a titled marriage. They said that she never should have dared to rise above her station. She refused to eat, refused to leave her house. She began to waste away. Her father almost went crazy with worry because he truly loved his only daughter. Fortunately, word of the generous offer spread, so it wasn't long before other suitors came calling, and one of them had a noble title, a Capulet title. Hoping to save his daughter's reputation, Valdeza agreed to the marriage on one condition. For Veronique's hand and access to half of Valdeza's fleet, this man would seek revenge forevermore on the Montagues. All was agreed, and Veronique married Lord Capulet. "Did she want to marry him?" I asked. "I cannot say. Her father arranged the marriage. Initially, Alfonso Montague felt no hatred towards the Capulet family, but as the years passed and the Capulets continued to attack his men and vilify his name, his heart began to rage, and he, in turn, vowed to seek revenge on all Capulets. While the feud thrives, many have forgotten the cause, but Lady Capulet has not forgotten. Even those who appear evil and wretched have feelings hidden beneath their powdered skin. Lady Capulet had loved and lost, badly. She had been humiliated, and her desire for revenge had blinded her. "Who goes there?" Friar Lawrence called out. Troy's eyes flew open and he sat up. Someone was coming up the stairs. I turned towards the doorway as a small robed figure entered. Troy hurled himself from the cot, grabbing the surgical knife from the bedside table. The front of the figure's robe bore a golden Capulet crest.